May 29th, 1453, the land walls of Theodosius, Constantinople. Before sunrise, the ancient city trembles beneath the thunder of the largest bombardment the medieval world has ever seen. Inside Hagia Sophia, thousands pray beneath a dome that has stood for nearly 1,000 years. Outside, tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers wait in absolute silence, their banners motionless in the pre-dawn stillness. In a few hours, one empire will fall, another will rise, and the world will change forever. From the sea, Constantinople appears as a city suspended between heaven and earth. The domes rise first from the morning mist, dozens of them crowned with crosses that catch the light like signals to God himself. Then the walls emerge, massive and ancient, stretching 7 miles from the Golden Horn to the Sea of Marmara. Triple-layered fortifications that have turned back Persians, Arabs, Avars, and Rus for more than 1,000 years. Walls that have never fallen. But this is 1453, and Constantinople is a city of ghosts. Once, 1 million souls lived within these walls. Now, barely 50,000 remain. Entire districts stand abandoned, their streets reclaimed by weeds and wild dogs. Grand palaces crumble in silence. The forums that once hosted the roar of crowds now echo with nothing but wind. In the shadow of Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, sheep graze in empty courtyards where emperors once walked. The empire that built this city conquered the known world. Rome itself bowed to Constantinople when the Western Empire collapsed 1,000 years ago. From here, Byzantine emperors ruled from Britain to the Euphrates, from the Danube to the deserts of North Africa. They called themselves Romans, and for centuries they were the only Romans who mattered. But empires do not die all at once. They fade, they shrink, they hollow out from within. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire consists of Constantinople, a few islands, and some territory in southern Greece. That is all. The rest has been devoured, piece by piece, century by century, by Crusaders, Bulgarians, Serbians, and most relentlessly, by the Ottomans. The Turks now control everything around the city. They rule Anatolia to the east. They occupy Thrace to the west. Ottoman fortresses line both shores of the Bosphorus. Constantinople sits like an island in an Ottoman sea, surviving not through strength but through the memory of strength, through walls built by emperors long dead, through the stubborn belief that God will not allow the city of Constantine to fall. Inside those walls, the people cling to prophecy. An angel will descend, they whisper in taverns and churches. A heavenly hand will strike down the enemies of Christ. Constantinople has been besieged 23 times in its history. 23 times it has survived. The walls have never been breached. The city has never fallen. Not yet. The great land walls still stand, 40 feet high, studded with 96 towers, fronted by a moat 60 feet wide. From a distance, they appear invincible. Up close, you see the cracks. Sections patched with rubble, towers leaning, mortar crumbling after centuries of earthquakes and neglect. There are not enough men to properly garrison them, not enough gold to repair them, not enough time. Because across the hills of Thrace, something is coming. Scouts report it first in late March. Dust clouds on the horizon, then banners, then the glint of armor stretching as far as the eye can see. An army unlike anything the medieval world has witnessed, and at its head, a sultan who has dreamed of this moment since childhood. Mehmed II is 21 years old, and he has already been sultan twice. The first time, his father Murad abdicated the throne when Mehmed was only 12, hoping to retire from the exhausting business of ruling an empire. The boy sultan lasted 2 years before his inexperience nearly led to disaster. Murad returned, reclaimed power, and Mehmed learned the most important lesson of his life. Wanting the throne is not enough. You must deserve it. Now his father is dead. Now Mehmed rules in his own right. And now he will prove to every doubter, every vizier who called him reckless, every janissary who questioned his courage, every sultan before him who failed, that he is worthy of the name conqueror. He was born in Edirne, the Ottoman capital, in a palace where his father kept hundreds of concubines and where half-brothers murdered each other for succession rights. Mehmed survived by being smarter, quicker, more ruthless than the others. He learned Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He studied the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Caesar. He brought European engineers to his court and learned the latest developments in metallurgy and siege warfare. But above all, he studied Constantinople. The maps covered the walls of his chambers. The histories filled his shelves. He knew every gate, every tower, every weakness in the legendary walls. He knew that 7 Ottoman sultans before him had dreamed of taking the city, and all had failed. His great-grandfather Bayezid had besieged it and been forced to withdraw. His father Murad had raided its suburbs, but never dared attempt a full assault. Mehmed would not make their mistakes. From childhood, he was taught that Constantinople was the jewel that would complete the Ottoman crown. The city controlled the straits between Europe and Asia. It sat at the crossroads of trade routes connecting east and west. It held relics and treasures beyond measure. And most importantly, it carried a weight of symbolism that could not be calculated in gold or territory. Constantinople was Rome, the last living remnant of the empire that had ruled the world for over 1,000 years. To take it would mean more than conquest. It would mean the end of an age. It would mean that the future belonged to the Ottomans, and the past could finally be buried. Mehmed's advisors warned him against it. The walls were too strong. The city had Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary weapon that had burned entire fleets. Christian Europe might unite to save Constantinople as they had during the Crusades. The cost in gold and lives would be catastrophic, even if they succeeded. Mehmed listened to every objection. Then he gave the order to march. He assembled an army of 80,000 soldiers, perhaps more. Janissaries in white caps and blue coats, the elite infantry who served as his personal guard. Azaps, irregular infantry drawn from across Anatolia. Thousands of cavalry, engineers, miners, siege specialists from across Europe, and gunners who brought with them weapons that would change warfare forever. The cannons were the key. Mehmed had commissioned the largest artillery pieces ever constructed, forged by a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who had first offered his services to the Byzantines. Constantinople could not afford him. Mehmed could. The guns were massive. Some required 60 oxen to move. They could hurl stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds. They had never been tested in real siege conditions, and half the engineers predicted they would explode from their own force. Mehmed didn't care. He would take Constantinople or die trying. And if the ancient walls that had stood for 1,000 years could not withstand modern firepower, then the world would learn a new truth. That the age of castles and walls was ending, and the age of gunpowder had begun. Constantine Palaiologos is 58 years old, and he knows he is going to die in this city. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. He has known it since the day he accepted the crown 8 years ago, when he became the 88th emperor of a dynasty that traced its lineage back to Augustus Caesar. There is no escape, no reinforcement strong enough to turn the tide, no miracle that will restore Byzantium to its former glory. The only question is whether he will die well. He was never supposed to be emperor. Constantine was the 8th son of Emperor Emmanuel II, born too far down the line of succession to expect the throne. He spent his youth as a provincial administrator, governing territories in southern Greece, while his older brothers ruled in Constantinople. He married twice. Both wives died young, leaving him childless. He learned to expect nothing from fate but hard work and loss. Then his brothers died, or became monks one by one, until only Constantine remained. In 1449, he was summoned to Constantinople and crowned in a ceremony so modest it would have been unthinkable in the empire's glory days. No patriarch officiated. The position was vacant due to political disputes. No foreign dignitaries attended. The crown was placed on his head in the church of Hagia Sophia by a single bishop, before a congregation that barely filled the nave. Constantine accepted the weight of that crown, knowing it came with an expiration date. He is not a brilliant strategist or a warrior king. He is a bureaucrat elevated by tragedy, a decent man who inherited an impossible situation. But he possesses something more valuable than genius: dignity. He will not abandon his city. He will not beg the Ottomans for terms that would reduce him to a vassal. He will not flee to Italy and live as a pensioner of the Pope. He is the emperor of the Romans, and if this empire must end, it will end with honor. The numbers are impossible. Constantinople can muster perhaps 7,000 defenders, citizens hastily trained in basic combat, monks too old for real fighting, a few hundred professional soldiers. Constantine has sent desperate pleas to every Christian power in Europe begging for aid. Venice sent 2 ships, Genoa sent 1, carrying the mercenary commander Giovanni Giustiniani, who arrived with 700 soldiers and immediately became Constantine's most valuable officer. The Pope promised a crusade that never materialized. The Italian city-states argued over terms. The kingdoms of Europe watched from a distance, calculating whether Constantinople's survival served their interests. Most decided it did not. So Constantine prepares his city as best he can. He inspects the walls daily, shoring up weak points with rubble and timber. He rations food strictly. The city has grain reserves to last perhaps 4 months if the siege drags on. He organizes the population into work brigades to repair damage and fight fires. He prays in Hagia Sophia alongside his people, standing for hours beneath the vast dome that has witnessed 1,000 years of prayer. At night, alone in the crumbling imperial palace, Constantine sometimes allows himself to imagine what his ancestors would think. Justinian, who reconquered North Africa and Italy. Heraclius, who crushed the Persians. Basil II, who destroyed the Bulgarian Empire and ruled from the Adriatic to Armenia. What would they say to this last emperor, who presides over nothing but a city and its ghosts? But Constantine knows the truth that pride tries to hide. Those emperors are as dead as their empires. Glory fades, power shifts, history moves on. All he can do is stand on these ancient walls and refuse to let Byzantium die without a fight. There is prophecy, of course. The people cling to it desperately. An emperor named Constantine founded this city. An emperor named Constantine will defend it to the last, and in the darkest hour, God will intervene. An angel will descend from heaven with a sword of fire and drive back the infidels. Constantinople will be saved, the empire will be restored, and all will be as it was. Constantine does not believe in prophecy. He believes in walls and soldiers and the will to endure. He believes that even doomed men can choose how they face the end. And when Mehmed's army appears on the horizon, banners filling the hills, drums echoing across the plains, cannons rolling forward like siege towers made of iron, Constantine climbs to the highest point on the Theodosian walls and watches the Ottomans deploy. 80,000 men against 7,000. Modern artillery against ancient stone, the future against the past. He does not flinch, he does not pray. He simply watches and prepares to do what the last Roman emperor must do: defend Rome until there is no Rome left to defend. The isolation is total, and it has been decades in the making. Constantinople stands at the center of the medieval world, and it is utterly alone. No great alliance will ride to its rescue. No fleet will break the Ottoman blockade. No crusade will form in Western Europe. The city that once commanded the loyalty of millions now cannot even count on its immediate neighbors for support. The Genoese colony of Galata sits directly across the Golden Horn from Constantinople, so close you could shoot an arrow from one shore to the other. Genoa has grown rich on Byzantine trade for centuries, their merchants profiting from every transaction that passes through Constantinople's ports. But when Mehmed's army arrives, Galata declares neutrality. They will not help the Ottomans. But they will not help the Byzantines either. Survival, they reason, requires accommodating the inevitable. Venice, the other great Italian maritime power, faces a similar calculation. Venetian merchants have quarters in Constantinople, ships in its harbours, investments in its survival. But Venice is stretched thin, fighting wars in northern Italy, competing with the Ottomans for control of Adriatic trade routes. The Senate debates for weeks before sending token support. Too little, too late, too calculated to preserve trading privileges with whoever wins. The Pope promises everything and delivers almost nothing. Pope Nicholas V calls for a crusade and offers spiritual rewards to any Christian who fights for Constantinople. But Europe's kings ignore him. France is recovering from the 100 Years' War. England is descending into the Wars of the Roses. The Holy Roman Empire is a patchwork of competing princes who cannot agree on anything. Hungary's warrior king Hunyadi might have helped, but he is elderly, exhausted from a lifetime of fighting the Ottomans, and his kingdom cannot field another army. Even the Orthodox Church, which considers Constantinople its spiritual capital, cannot unite Christendom. The Byzantine emperors have spent decades negotiating with Rome, offering religious unity in exchange for military aid. In 1439, at the Council of Florence, they agreed to a merger of Eastern and Orthodox churches. But the people of Constantinople rejected it. They would rather fall to the Turks, many said, than submit to the Pope. Constantine tries again in the final months before the siege. He officially accepts the union of churches in a desperate bid to unlock Western support. In December 1452, a joint Catholic Orthodox Mass is celebrated in Hagia Sophia. Half the congregation walks out in disgust. "Better the Sultan's turban than the Cardinal's hat," they mutter in the streets. The religious divide dooms any hope of a united Christian response. And Mehmed knows it. The Ottomans have spent decades exploiting European disunity. They play Venice against Genoa, bribe officials in Italian city-states, sign temporary truces with Hungary to keep them neutral. Mehmed's father understood that the best way to defeat Christendom was to let Christians defeat themselves. And the strategy has worked flawlessly. By 1453, the Ottoman Empire is the strongest, most centralized state in the region. Mehmed commands absolute authority. His soldiers are paid regularly, fed from organized supply lines, equipped with the best weapons Ottoman gold can buy. The Janissaries are fanatically loyal, raised from childhood to serve the Sultan. The cavalry is battle-hardened from decades of constant warfare. The artillery corps is staffed with European engineers who bring cutting-edge technology to an empire willing to pay for it. Constantinople, by contrast, is bankrupt. The imperial treasury is empty. The last emperor pawned the crown jewels to pay soldiers who deserted anyway. The city's population is a fraction of its former size, and most of those who remain are too old, too young, or too poor to fight effectively. The navy consists of a handful of aging ships. The army is an improvised militia, supplemented by a few hundred foreign mercenaries. Geopolitically, the situation is even worse. The Ottomans control the hinterland. They can besiege Constantinople indefinitely, supplied by the vast resources of Anatolia and Thrace. The Byzantines, trapped within their walls, have only what they stockpiled before the siege began. Food will run out, gunpowder will run out, hope will run out, and everyone knows it. The Ottoman soldiers know it as they pitch their tents within sight of the walls. The Byzantine defenders know it as they watch the encirclement tighten. Mehmed knows it as he rides through his camp, inspecting artillery positions and finalizing assault plans. Constantine knows it as he walks the walls at night, listening to the sounds of 80,000 enemies settling in for a siege that will end only one way. The question is not whether Constantinople will fall. The question is how long it can hold, how many will die, and whether the last Romans will surrender or fight to the final breath. The city has no allies, no reinforcements, no escape. It has only its walls, its faith, and the memory of 1,000 years when those things were enough. They are not enough anymore. On the 6th of April, 1453, the first cannon fires. The sound is like nothing anyone in Constantinople has ever heard. Not the crack of thunder or the roar of an avalanche, but something deeper, a percussion that travels through the earth and rattles bones, that makes dust fall from cathedral ceilings miles away, that causes horses to rear and dogs to howl in terror throughout the city. The stone ball weighs 1,200 pounds. It has been loaded into Urban's massive cannon, the largest gun ever constructed, a bronze monster over 27 feet long that required 60 oxen and 200 men to drag across Thrace. The gunpowder charge alone weighs 300 pounds. When it detonates, the ground shakes. A plume of smoke erupts from the Ottoman lines, and the projectile arcs through the morning sky, black against the sun, before it slams into the Theodosian walls with force that makes the ancient stones shudder. A section of the outer wall collapses. Not a breach, not yet, but a wound in fortifications that have stood for over 1,000 years. The defenders stare in disbelief. The Ottomans cheer, and Mehmed, watching from a command post behind the lines, allows himself a cold smile. This is what the future looks like. The Ottoman army has completely encircled Constantinople by land. Mehmed's tent, a massive silk pavilion coloured red and gold, sits on a hill overlooking the Lycus Valley, the lowest point in the city's defences and the obvious target for the main assault. From here, he can observe the entire western wall, 7 miles of fortifications that must be broken if the city is to fall. His generals have positioned the army in precise formations. The right flank, facing the Golden Horn, consists of Anatolian troops under the command of Ishak Pasha. The left flank, stretching to the Sea of Marmara, is held by European troops under Karaka Pasha. And the centre, the critical sector facing the Lycus Valley, is commanded by Mehmed himself, with the Janissaries held in reserve for the final assault. Behind the lines, the artillery is being prepared. 70 cannons of various sizes, the largest concentration of gunpowder weapons ever assembled for a siege. Urban's great gun is the crown jewel, but there are dozens of smaller pieces, culverins, bombards, mortars, positioned to fire at different sections of wall simultaneously. The plan is simple and brutal. Pound the fortifications day and night until they crack, then send in waves of infantry to overwhelm the exhausted defenders. But there is a problem. The great cannon can only fire 7 times per day. Each shot requires hours of cooling, cleaning, and reloading. The barrel runs dangerously hot. The recoil is so powerful it damages the gun's wooden carriage. Urban's engineers work frantically between each firing to reinforce the supports and prevent the weapon from tearing itself apart. Still, 7 shots per day is 7 more than Constantinople can answer. The Byzantines have cannons of their own, but they are smaller, older, poorly maintained. One explodes during an early exchange, killing its crew and demolishing a section of the inner wall. Constantine orders the remaining guns fired sparingly. They cannot afford to lose more. From the sea, the situation is equally dire. Mehmed's Admiral Baltaolu has assembled a fleet of over 100 ships, triremes, galleys, transport vessels, that blockade the city from the Sea of Marmara. They cannot enter the Golden Horn, which is sealed by a massive chain stretched across the harbour mouth, but they prevent any relief from arriving by sea. Constantinople is cut off completely. Inside the walls, Constantine organises the defence with methodical desperation. Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, takes charge of the most vulnerable sector near the Lycus Valley. He has his men working around the clock, packing rubble into breaches, building wooden palisades behind damaged sections, preparing stockpiles of stones and Greek fire for close combat. The few cannons that still function are positioned to cover approaches to the wall. The civilian population is mobilized completely. Women and children haul stones and timber to repair crews. Monks form bucket brigades in case of fire. Every able-bodied man takes shifts on the walls. There are not enough defenders to adequately garrison the entire 7-mile perimeter, so Constantine must constantly shift troops to meet new threats, gambling that the Ottomans will not launch simultaneous assaults in multiple locations. The bombardment continues day after day. Urban's great gunfires at sunrise, noon, and sunset. The smaller cannons maintain a steady rhythm. The noise becomes constant, a rolling thunder that never stops, punctuated by the crash of stone on stone and the screams of men crushed beneath falling masonry. Dust hangs over the city like fog. The ground trembles. Cracks appear in buildings blocks away from the walls. At night, the defenders work by torchlight to repair the damage. They pack earth and rubble into breaches. They shore up weakened sections with timber. They say prayers and scan the darkness for signs of Ottoman sappers tunneling beneath the walls. Sleep becomes impossible. Exhaustion becomes normal. And slowly, day by day, the ancient fortifications begin to crack under the relentless modern assault. Mehmed watches from his pavilion and calculates. The walls are weakening. The defenders are tiring. But his own supplies are not infinite. Each cannon shot consumes precious gunpowder. Each day of siege costs gold he cannot easily replace. And there is always the risk that a relief force might arrive from Europe, unlikely, but possible. He sends emissaries to Constantine with an offer. Surrender now, and the city will be spared. The people can leave with their possessions. Constantine can retire as governor of a Byzantine province under Ottoman protection. No blood needs to be spilled. No churches need to be destroyed. Constantine's reply is curt. Surrendering the city is not my decision, nor anyone else's who lives here. We have all decided to die of our own free will. The bombardment intensifies. Chapter 6. The Theodosian walls were built to outlast empires, and for over 1,000 years they did exactly that. Emperor Theodosius II ordered their construction in the year 413, when Constantinople was barely a century old and already outgrowing its original defences. The architect Anthemius designed something unprecedented. Not one wall, but 3, layered in depth like the rings of a fortress that could swallow armies whole. The outer wall stands 25 feet high, studded with towers at regular intervals. Behind it runs a wide terrace called the Peribolos, providing space for defenders to maneuver and regroup. Then comes the inner wall, 40 feet of solid limestone, thick enough that catapults and battering rams shatter against it like waves against a cliff. Finally, behind everything, lies the city itself, with a third defensive line for a last stand if the unthinkable happens. But the genius lies in what comes before the walls. A moat 60 feet wide fronts the entire fortification, deep enough to drown men in armour, wide enough that siege towers cannot cross it. Beyond the moat, open ground has been cleared for hundreds of yards, giving archers and artillery perfect fields of fire against anyone foolish enough to approach. 23 sieges have broken against these defences. Arabs in the 7th and 8th centuries brought the largest fleets the world had seen. They starved and withdrew. Bulgarians under Khan Krum brought savage warriors who had conquered the Balkans. They failed to breach even the outer wall. Avars and Persians and Rus all tried and failed. The walls became mythic, a symbol that some things were simply unconquerable. But those sieges were fought with swords and arrows and catapults, with siege towers made of wood and ladders made of rope, with men who could be held back by height and stone and boiling oil poured from battlements. Mehmed brings gunpowder. Urban's cannons operate on principles the ancient builders never imagined. Bronze cast with mathematical precision. Powder mixed to ratios refined over decades of experimentation. Stone balls carved to fit barrel diameters exactly, maximizing force transfer. When they fire, they deliver energy measured not in human muscle or animal strength, but in controlled explosions that concentrate violence into single points. The walls crack. Not everywhere. Not all at once. But they crack. The defenders watch in horror as sections that have stood for 10 centuries begin to fail. Blocks split along ancient mortar lines. Towers lean as their foundations shift. The outer wall, designed to absorb impacts from rams and catapults, cannot distribute the focused trauma of cannon fire. Stone that has withstood a millennium shatters in weeks. Giustiniani understands what is happening. He is a professional soldier from Genoa, a man who has fought in Italy where artillery is already changing, siege warfare. He knows the walls are dying. The question is whether they can be kept standing long enough. His solution is medieval ingenuity applied to a modern problem. Behind each breach, his men construct wooden palisades, temporary walls to block Ottoman infantry if they force an entry. They pack damaged sections with barrels of earth, creating shock absorbers that dissipate cannon impacts. They hang leather hides soaked in vinegar on exposed stonework to cushion blows and prevent fires. They work through bombardments, scrambling to repair damage faster than Mehmed can inflict it. But every day, the mathematics grow worse. The Ottomans fire 70 cannons. The defenders can barely maintain 7. Ottoman soldiers rotate shifts, resting in camps with food and water brought from across Anatolia. Byzantine defenders stand watch for days without relief, eating rationed bread, drinking from wells that are starting to run low. And Urban's great gun continues its terrible rhythm. Dawn. The earth shakes, and another section of the outer wall collapses. Noon. A tower takes a direct hit, and its upper section tumbles into the moat. Dusk. The Lycus Valley section, already the weakest point, develops a crack that runs 30 feet down the inner wall's face. Mehmed's engineers study the damage through spyglasses. They mark weak points on maps. They calculate angles and powder charges. They are not trying to demolish the entire 7 miles of fortifications. They only need one breach wide enough to send the Janissaries through, one gap in the legendary walls, and Constantinople falls. The defenders know it too. They watch the cracks spread like veins through dying flesh. They feel the vibrations with each new impact. They understand that they are witnessing the end of an age. The walls that defied the world for 1,000 years are learning what stone has always known. That nothing built by human hands lasts forever, and that time, whether measured in centuries or in the seconds between cannon shots, eventually conquers all. Chapter 7. The first major assault comes on the 18th of April, 12 days into the siege. Mehmed chooses midnight. No bombardment precedes it, just silence, sudden and absolute, after days of constant artillery fire. The defenders, exhausted from repair work, allow themselves brief moments of rest. Some sleep at their posts. Others stare into darkness, wondering if the guns have finally cracked from overuse. Then the war drums begin. The sound rises from the Ottoman camp like thunder made rhythmic. Deep Turkish drums called davul beat in patterns designed to quicken hearts and shake nerves. Cymbals crash, horns blow. And behind it all, a sound that turns blood cold. 80,000 men chanting, Allah, Allah, in perfect unison. The words rolling across the plain like an approaching storm. The defenders scramble to positions. Torches flare along the walls. Officers scream orders. And then the Ottomans emerge from darkness. Thousands of irregular troops called Bashi bazooks, lightly armoured and expendable, sent forward in human waves to test defences and exhaust the defenders before the real soldiers attack. They carry ladders, grappling hooks, shields. They run screaming toward the moat, and Byzantine archers let fly. Arrows fall like rain. Men tumble forward, struck mid-stride. Others trip over bodies and are trampled by those behind them. The moat fills with the dying and the desperate. Some try to swim the 60-foot gap in full armour and sink immediately. Others reach the outer wall and raise their ladders, only to have defenders push them back with long poles or pour Greek fire down on climbers. Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's legendary incendiary weapon. The exact formula has been a state secret for centuries, known only to imperial chemists. It burns on water. It clings to flesh. It cannot be extinguished except with vinegar or sand. When the defenders pour it from the battlements, it turns the moat into a river of flame. Men burn while drowning. The screaming is unbearable. But the Bashi bazooks keep coming. This is Mehmed's strategy. Spend his irregular troops to wear down the defenders, identify weak points, force the Byzantines to use their limited supplies of arrows and Greek fire. It is brutal, calculated, ruthless. Thousands of men die for reconnaissance purposes. Near the Lycus Valley, where Urban's cannon has opened the widest breaches, the assault nearly succeeds. Ottoman troops force their way through a gap in the outer wall and fight hand-to-hand with defenders in the Peribolos. Giustiniani leads a counterattack personally, wielding a sword in the press of bodies, rallying soldiers who are ready to break. His presence holds the line. The Genoese mercenaries and Byzantine regulars push the Ottomans back through the breach, piling bodies to block the gap. The assault lasts 4 hours. When the Ottoman drums finally signal withdrawal, 3,000 irregular troops lie dead in the moat and around the walls. Byzantine casualties are perhaps 300, a ratio that seems favourable until you do the mathematics. Constantinople has 7,000 defenders. Mehmed has 80,000 soldiers. He can afford these losses. Constantine cannot. Dawn reveals the carnage. The moat is choked with corpses. Blood stains the walls 20 feet high where defenders poured fire and dropped stones. Ladders lean against stonework, their climbers dead on the rungs. And on the Ottoman side, engineers are already taking notes, marking which sections held and which showed weakness. Mehmed studies their reports with cold satisfaction. The assault failed, yes, but it succeeded in its real purpose. He knows now that the Lycus Valley is vulnerable. He knows the defenders are stretched too thin to hold multiple breaches simultaneously. He knows they exhausted most of their Greek fire reserves. And most importantly, he knows they can be beaten. That night, the defenders work frantically to repair the breaches before the next assault. They drag beams and rubble from demolished buildings. They build makeshift barricades. They redistribute ammunition and Greek fire supplies, knowing there is not enough for another defense like the last one. Constantine walks the walls at midnight, stopping to speak with soldiers too exhausted to stand properly. "One more day," he tells them. "Hold one more day, and help will come." He does not believe this, neither do they. But they nod and return to their posts, because what else can they do? Giustiniani oversees the construction of a new defensive position behind the worst breach. It is a wooden palisade reinforced with earth-filled barrels, a wall behind the wall, a last resort if the Ottomans break through. He works alongside common soldiers, hauling timber with his own hands, and the men love him for it. The bombardment resumes at dawn. The cannons have been repositioned slightly, targeting the sections that showed the most damage during the night assault. The Ottoman strategy is clear now. Break the walls, probe with infantry, break them more, probe again. A relentless cycle of destruction and testing, grinding down both fortifications and defenders until something gives. And every day, the breaches grow wider. Every night, the repairs grow more desperate. Every hour, the mathematics of survival grow worse. Constantinople is bleeding slowly, and everyone inside the walls knows that this is a wound that cannot be healed. On the morning of the 22nd of April, the impossible happens. Lookouts on Constantinople's northern walls, facing the Golden Horn, see something that makes them believe their exhaustion has driven them mad. Ships, Ottoman ships, inside the Golden Horn, behind the great chain that has sealed the harbour entrance since the siege began. It cannot be. The chain stretches from Constantinople to the Genoese colony of Galata, a massive iron barrier anchored on both shores, capable of stopping any vessel from entering. The Byzantine fleet, small as it is, guards the entrance. The Golden Horn is safe. It has always been safe, until now. Mehmed's plan was conceived weeks ago and executed in total secrecy. Since the Ottoman fleet could not sail through the chain, they would sail around it, over land. His engineers constructed a road from the Bosphorus, over the hills north of Galata, descending to the far shore of the Golden Horn. They greased the path with animal fat and laid wooden rollers. Then, on the night of the 21st, They began moving ships, full-sized war galleys, up the hillside by brute force. Teams of oxen pulled. Thousands of soldiers pushed. The ships moved 1 foot at a time, their hulls groaning, their masts swaying dangerously. Commanders shouted orders in a dozen languages. Torches lit the scene like a vision from mythology. Warships sailing over mountains in the darkness. By dawn, 70 Ottoman vessels floated in the Golden Horn, behind Constantinople's defences, inside what was supposed to be the city's safe harbour. The psychological impact is devastating. The people of Constantinople gather on the northern walls and stare in disbelief. How do you fight an enemy who can make ships fly over hills? How do you defend against a sultan who accomplishes the impossible as casually as other men issue orders? The strategic impact is even worse. Constantinople must now defend its entire northern perimeter. Miles of walls along the Golden Horn that were lightly guarded because the harbour was supposed to be secure. Constantine has to pull troops from the already undermanned western defences to cover this new threat. His 7,000 defenders must now stretch even thinner across an even longer perimeter. Mehmed's admirals waste no time. They position the fleet along the Golden Horn shore and begin constructing pontoon bridges to enable infantry assaults directly onto the sea walls. These walls are lower than the massive Theodosian fortifications, less heavily defended, and now suddenly vulnerable. The defenders watch in horror as Ottoman engineers work in plain view, building platforms for cannons to fire at point-blank range. The Genoese in Galata are mortified. Ottoman ships sailed past their colony, technically neutral territory, using roads that clearly cross Genoese land. Their neutrality is exposed as worthless, their word as meaningless. But they do nothing. They cannot. To oppose Mehmed now would invite annihilation, so they watch from their towers as the Ottomans turn the Golden Horn into a second front, and they congratulate themselves on staying alive. Constantine calls an emergency council. Giustiniani argues for an immediate naval counterattack to burn the Ottoman fleet while it's still vulnerable in the confined harbour waters. But the Byzantine navy is tiny, perhaps 20 ships compared to 70 Ottoman vessels. A failed attack would cost Constantinople its only naval force and achieve nothing. Others propose bribing the Genoese to allow a raid from Galata's shore. But Galata has made its position clear: survival through neutrality. They will not jeopardize that for Byzantium's sake. In the end, Constantine orders defensive measures. Troops are redistributed to the northern walls. Cannons are moved, precious guns that are desperately needed on the western front, now forced to cover the Golden Horn. Wooden booms are constructed to block Ottoman ships from approaching certain sections of seawall. It is all improvisation, all reaction, all proof that Mehmed controls the tempo of this siege completely. The mood inside the city shifts from grim determination to something darker. The people have watched the bombardment crack their legendary walls. They have seen assaults repelled at terrible cost. But this, ships crossing mountains, feels supernatural, prophetic. Like God himself has withdrawn his protection and left Constantinople to face its doom alone. Priests try to counter the despair with sermons about faith and divine intervention. They remind congregations of past miracles: the Virgin Mary appearing on the walls during Arab sieges, storms destroying enemy fleets, plague striking besiegers. They quote prophecies about the angel who will descend with a flaming sword when all seems lost. But even the priests sound uncertain now. Even the prophecies seem to falter against the reality of Ottoman ships floating where ships should not float, Ottoman cannons firing where no cannons should reach, Ottoman soldiers surrounding the city so completely that not even God's angels could find a gap. That night, citizens crowd into churches throughout Constantinople. They pray for deliverance. They pray for relief from the West. They pray for anything to change the mathematics of this siege. And outside, in the Ottoman camp, Mehmed stands on the shore of the Golden Horn and surveys his fleet. 70 warships that sailed over a mountain. 70 warships that turned an impregnable harbour into a battlefield. 70 warships that prove what he has always believed: that the impossible is just another problem awaiting the right solution. He gives orders for the next phase. Intensify the bombardment, probe the northern walls, cut off all remaining supply lines, and begin final preparations for the great assault that will end this siege and this empire together. Constantinople has held for 16 days. It will not hold much longer. By the first week of May, Constantinople is dying from within. The bread rations have been cut twice. Citizens receive barely enough to survive. A few ounces of stale grain daily, baked into loaves so hard they must be soaked in water to chew. The wealthy hoarded food in the siege's early days, but even those reserves are running low. In poorer districts, people boil leather and eat weeds growing in abandoned courtyards. Children cry from hunger. The elderly simply lie down and do not rise again. Disease follows famine like a shadow. Dysentery spreads through crowded refugee quarters where thousands have fled from exposed neighborhoods near the walls. The dead are buried in mass graves when there is time, left where they fall when there is not. The smell of decay hangs over entire districts. Rats multiply. Wells become contaminated. And still the bombardment continues day after day, grinding down both stone and spirit. The defenders are beyond exhaustion. Men stand watch for 36-hour shifts because there are not enough soldiers to rotate properly. They sleep standing up, weapons in hand, jerking awake at every sound. Officers stop bothering with discipline. What punishment can threaten men who expect to die within days anyway? Soldiers pray openly that the next assault will kill them quickly rather than leaving them wounded to die slowly in the ruins. Ammunition is critically low. Arrows must be collected from corpses and reused until the shafts splinter. Crossbow bolts are fired only at certain targets. Gunpowder for the few working cannons is measured in spoonfuls. Greek fire is gone entirely, the last reserves exhausted during the previous assault. When the next attack comes, the defenders will have only swords and stones. And yet, faith intensifies. In this darkest hour, as rational hope evaporates, the people of Constantinople turn to the irrational with desperate fervor. The churches are packed day and night with crowds praying for miracles. Relics are paraded through streets. Bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, icons said to weep tears of oil. Processions wind through the city chanting hymns, their voices competing with the thunder of Ottoman cannons. The prophecies circulate constantly now, repeated in markets and taverns, on walls and in churches. The most powerful speaks of the last emperor. A king named Constantine, born of a Helen, will rule at the city's founding and at its fall. When all seems lost, an angel will come from heaven and hand him a sword, saying, "Take this and avenge the Lord's people." And the Turks will flee in terror, pursued to the borders of Persia. Constantine Palaiologos is indeed named Constantine. His mother was indeed named Helena. The prophecy fits too perfectly to be coincidence, the faithful insist. God has ordained this moment. The fall of Constantinople is not written. Deliverance is. Any day now, any hour, the miracle will come. Even educated clergy who once dismissed such talk as superstition find themselves hoping. What else is there? No Western fleet appears on the horizon. No crusading army marches to the rescue. The walls crack further each day. The breaches widen. The Ottoman noose tightens. If God does not intervene, Constantinople will fall. So God must intervene. The alternative is unthinkable. Strange omens are reported and amplified. A lunar eclipse on the 22nd of May plunges the city into red-tinged darkness, surely a sign of coming deliverance. A dove flies into Hagia Sophia and becomes trapped, battering itself against windows, interpreted as the Holy Spirit struggling to free Constantinople from its cage. Fog rolls off the sea one evening and drapes the city in white mist. God's cloak protecting his city from Ottoman eyes, people whisper. But there are darker omens too. During a religious procession, An icon of the Virgin Mary falls from its platform and cannot be lifted, as if even the Mother of God is too heavy with sorrow to be raised. Thunder and rain batter the city the next day, flooding streets and collapsing repair work on the walls. And on the 24th of May, witnesses swear they see strange lights playing around the dome of Hagia Sophia, a glow that pulses and fades, as if the divine presence is departing the church that has been its home for nearly 1,000 years. Constantine walks among his people in these final days, and what he sees breaks his heart. Hollow-eyed soldiers who no longer clean their weapons because they do not expect to survive to use them again. Women holding starving children, rocking them and singing lullabies about angels and paradise. Old men sitting in ruined forums, reminiscing about Constantinoples that no longer exist, the prosperous city of their youth, the glorious city of their grandfathers' tales, the eternal city that was supposed to outlast time itself. He attends Mass in Hagia Sophia and barely recognizes the ceremony. The liturgy is the same, the incense and chanting unchanged, but the congregation has transformed into something from the apocalypse. Gaunt faces lit by candles, voices cracked from thirst and weeping, people prostrating themselves in desperate pleas for salvation. Constantine prays alongside them, but his prayers are different. He does not ask for miracles or divine intervention. He asks only for courage, for the strength to do what must be done when the final assault comes, for the dignity to die as an emperor should, standing on the walls of Rome rather than fleeing like a coward, because Constantine knows what prophecies cannot change, that mathematics are more powerful than faith, that gunpowder breaks stone regardless of blessings, that 7,000 exhausted defenders cannot hold 7 miles of crumbling walls against 80,000 soldiers forever. He knows that Constantinople is already dead. It just has not. On the 23rd of May, Mehmed sends his final emissary. The man is a Greek diplomat named Isidore, someone both sides know and trust. He approaches under a white flag, is admitted through the gate of Carisius, and is escorted directly to Constantine, in what remains of the imperial palace. The emperor receives him in a hall where rain leaks through holes in the ceiling and pigeons nest in the rafters. Isidore delivers Mehmed's message verbatim. Surrender the city and no blood will be spilled. The Sultan guarantees the safety of all citizens. Christians may keep their churches. Property will be protected. You yourself may rule the Peloponnese as an Ottoman vassal, with honor and wealth. Refuse, and when the city falls, and it will fall, the laws of war apply. 3 days of plunder for the soldiers. No mercy for those who resisted. The streets will run with blood, and history will remember that Constantine Palaiologos chose annihilation over reason. The hall is silent except for dripping water. Constantine's advisors wait for him to speak. Some hope he will accept. Others know he will not. Constantine's reply is measured, almost gentle. Tell the Sultan that surrendering the city is beyond my authority and beyond anyone's who lives here. We have discussed this among ourselves, soldiers and citizens alike, and we have decided to die of our own free will. We will not spare our lives. Tell him I thank him for his promises regarding our safety, but I will take only one thing from him, his determination to fight to the end, which I will match with my own. Write this: I will not surrender Constantinople while I live. Let Mehmed do what he must. God's will be done. Isidore bows and withdraws. He reports back to Mehmed, who receives the refusal without surprise. Perhaps he is even pleased. A negotiated surrender would be a diplomatic victory, but storming the legendary walls will be a triumph that echoes through history. Let Constantine die on his walls. It will make the victory sweeter. Mehmed orders final preparations. The assault will come on the 29th of May, after sunset. The entire army will attack simultaneously at multiple points along the western wall, forcing Constantine to spread his meager defenders impossibly thin. The irregulars will go first, as before, to exhaust the Byzantines. then the provincial troops to press the advantage. Finally, the Janissaries, the elite, the unbreakable, will deliver the killing blow. The bombardment intensifies to levels previously unimaginable. Every cannon fires constantly. Urban's great gun roars 4 times on the 27th, 8 times on the 28th. The outer wall in the Lycus Valley collapses completely. The inner wall is breached in 3 places. Towers lean at impossible angles. Defenders abandon entire sections because the stonework is too unstable to stand on. But still, they prepare. Giustiniani positions his best troops at the Lycus breaches. Constantine distributes the remaining reserves along the walls. Every weapon is sharpened. Every man is given what may be his final meal: a few ounces of bread, a cup of wine diluted with water. Officers circulate among the troops offering final instructions, final encouragements, final absolutions from priests who move through the ranks, blessing soldiers who kneel in the ruins. On the evening of the 28th, Constantine addresses his commanders in a small church near the walls. He speaks without notes, his voice steady despite everything. Gentlemen, you know that this empire has endured for 1100 years. We are the last. The men who hold the line tomorrow are the last defenders of Rome. Not the Rome of Italy, which fell 1,000 years ago, but the true Rome, the eternal Rome, the empire that carried civilization through darkness and preserved learning when the world forgot how to read. He pauses, and in that pause, you can hear the bombardment, constant now, an earthquake that never ends. I do not know if we will survive tomorrow. I do not know if God will send the miracle we have prayed for. But I know this: Rome will end with honor. We will fight not because we expect to win, but because fighting is what Romans do. And when they write of this day centuries from now, they will write that the last Romans stood their ground, that they did not beg or flee or surrender, that they fell with weapons in their hands and defiance in their hearts. He looks at each man: Greeks, Genoese, Venetians, Catalans, soldiers who came from across Europe to defend a city that is not their own. Thank you, he says simply. Thank you for standing with us at the end. The commanders embrace. Some weep, others pray. Then they disperse to their positions, walking through a city that feels like a tomb waiting to be sealed. That night, the people of Constantinople fill Hagia Sophia for a final mass. Orthodox and Catholic priests serve together, the schism forgotten in the face of annihilation. The church is packed beyond capacity. Thousands press together beneath the great dome, chanting hymns that have been sung in this space for nearly 1,000 years. Constantine attends in full imperial regalia. He takes communion. He asks forgiveness from anyone he has wronged. Then he walks slowly through the crowd, and people reach out to touch him, to receive his blessing, to say goodbye to the last emperor of Rome. Near midnight, he leaves the church and rides toward the walls. The bombardment has stopped. The silence is more terrifying than the noise. Across the darkness, the Ottoman army waits, 80,000 men, who have been ordered to prepare for the assault of their lives. Mehmed has promised his soldiers 3 days of plunder if they take the city by storm. 3 days to loot the richest churches in Christendom, to claim treasures hoarded for centuries, to take as slaves whoever survives. 3 days of reward for 53 days of siege. The soldiers sharpen their swords and check their armor. The siege towers are rolled into position. The ladders are distributed. Orders are whispered down the ranks. And in his red pavilion, Mehmed kneels in prayer, asking Allah for victory in the battle that will define his reign and his place in history. May 29th, 1453. Hours before dawn, the ancient world and the modern world face each other across broken walls in silence. And then the drums begin. The 28th of May, 1453. The final sunset over Constantinople. The bombardment stops at dusk. After 52 days of constant thunder, the silence feels unnatural, oppressive, like the held breath before a scream. Citizens emerge cautiously from shelters and stare at the western horizon, where the Ottoman camp spreads like a second city. Campfires numbering in the thousands, smoke rising into a blood-red sky. Everyone knows what the silence means. Tomorrow. The final assault comes tomorrow. By nightfall, Hagia Sophia is so packed that people cannot move. 10,000 souls pressed together beneath the Great Dome, Orthodox and Catholic united for the first time in centuries. Greeks and Italians shoulder to shoulder. Soldiers still wearing armor standing beside women clutching children. Monks and merchants and beggars all equal before God in this final hour. The priests conduct the divine liturgy in Greek and Latin simultaneously, their voices weaving together in harmonies that have echoed through this space for 900 years. Incense rises in clouds so thick they obscure the mosaics depicting Christ Pantocrator, the all-powerful, judging the living and the dead. Candles burn by the thousands. The heat is suffocating. People faint and cannot fall because the crowd holds them upright. They sing the Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, and the ancient words take on desperate new meaning. They chant psalms about deliverance from enemies, about God smiting the wicked, about the righteous preserved through tribulation. Some pray for the prophesied miracle, others pray simply for courage, for a quick death, for their children to survive what comes next. Constantine arrives near midnight. He has removed his imperial regalia and wears simple armor, anonymous among his soldiers. He takes communion at the altar, kneeling like any penitent, and when he rises, his face is calm. He has made peace with what morning will bring. He moves through the crowd and people reach for him, not grasping, just touching his hand, his shoulder, needing contact with the last emperor in the last hours of empire. He stops to embrace commanders he has fought beside for weeks. Giustiniani, the Genoese mercenary who became a brother. Minotto, the Venetian bailo who chose to stay though Venice offered him escape. Theophilus Palaiologos, Constantine's own cousin, who will die on the walls beside him. Whatever happens tomorrow, Constantine tells them quietly, know that you have served Rome with honor. No men could have done more. No empire could have asked for better defenders. They embrace as men do when they know they are saying goodbye forever. Across the walls, in camps and on battlements, 7,000 defenders make their own preparations. Some write final letters they know will never be delivered. Others sharpen swords until the blades gleam in moonlight. A few sleep, the exhausted sleep of men too tired to fear death. Most simply wait, staring into darkness, thinking of homes they will not see again, of children who will grow up without fathers, of all the small ordinary things they took for granted and will lose with the dawn. In the Ottoman camp, a different kind of preparation unfolds. Mehmed gathers his commanders in his pavilion, generals who have conquered across Anatolia and the Balkans, veterans of a dozen sieges, men who know exactly what tomorrow requires. The Janissaries attack at the Lycus Valley, Mehmed says, pointing to maps spread across carpets. Simultaneously, the Anatolian divisions assault the northern walls along the Golden Horn. The European divisions strike at the southern sections near the Marmara. We hit them everywhere at once. Constantine cannot defend 7 miles of wall with 7,000 men. Somewhere they will break. His commanders nod. The mathematics are undeniable. The strategy is sound. Victory is inevitable. But Mehmed adds one final instruction. I want Constantine Palaiologos taken alive if possible. He has earned the right to die with dignity, not butchered in the chaos of assault. If you find him, bring him to me. No one truly believes they will capture him alive. Constantine has made clear he intends to die defending his city. But the order reflects something in Mehmed, a respect for the man who refused surrender, who chose honor over survival, who understood that some things matter more than breathing. The commanders disperse to their units. Across the camp, 80,000 soldiers prepare weapons and armor. Imams move among them, offering prayers. Officers distribute final rations, bread and dates and water from the camp's wells, an abundance that mocks the starvation inside Constantinople's walls. The men are eager. 53 days of siege, of watching friends die to cannon and arrow, of exhausting labor hauling siege equipment and dodging Greek fire. Tomorrow they will finally storm the walls, and when the city falls, 3 days of plunder await as their reward. Midnight passes. The hours crawl toward dawn. On the walls, Byzantine defenders stand their final watch. In the camps, Ottoman soldiers wait for the signal to attack, and in Hagia Sophia, the prayers continue without pause, voices rising toward a dome that has sheltered the faithful through 1,000 years of triumph and terror, peace and war, glory and decline. The ancient cathedral has witnessed coronations of emperors, the reconciliation of schisms, the flash of treasure beyond measure. Tomorrow it will witness the end of Byzantium itself. But tonight, in these final hours, it holds the last Romans as they pray for a deliverance they will not receive and prepare to meet a fate they cannot escape. Outside, the stars wheel overhead in patterns unchanged since the city was founded. The wind carries the scent of the sea, and somewhere in the darkness, time itself holds its breath. Before the moment, everything changes. The assault begins at 1:30 in the morning, May 29th, 1453. The Ottoman drums shatter the silence first, a rhythm like accelerating heartbeats, building in intensity and speed until the sound becomes a physical pressure against the chest. Then the war cries erupt, 80,000 voices screaming, "Allah! Allah!" in unison, the words rolling across the plain like an audible tsunami. The Bashi bazooks charge first, just as they did in the earlier assaults. Irregulars and volunteers promised paradise if they die and plunder if they survive. They pour across the filled moat carrying ladders and torches, and the Byzantine defenders unleash everything they have left. Arrows, stones, boiling water, the occasional gunshot from precious remaining gunpowder. Men fall in waves, but the waves keep coming, crashing against the walls like a human tide that cannot be stopped, only endured. Giustiniani commands the Lycus Valley section, the weakest point, where Urban's cannons have devastated the fortifications. His Genoese mercenaries and Byzantine regulars fight with desperate skill, throwing down ladders, cutting climbing ropes, dropping stones on attackers who reach the battlements. The fighting is intimate and brutal. Swords against clubs, daggers in close quarters, men grappling and falling together from heights that kill them both. The first wave breaks after 2 hours. Ottoman officers pull the Bashi bazooks back, leaving perhaps 5,000 dead around the walls. The defenders allow themselves moments of hope. They have held, as they always have, as the prophecies promised. Then the professional troops attack. Mehmed's provincial divisions, Anatolian and European regiments, trained soldiers with proper armor and discipline, advance in organized formations. They carry better equipment, coordinate their assaults, exploit weaknesses identified during the first wave. At multiple points along the walls simultaneously, they attack with ladders and siege hooks, forcing Constantine to rush reserves from section to section, always one step behind the next crisis. Near the Golden Horn, Ottoman troops assault the sea walls from ships and pontoon bridges. The defenders here are fewer, the walls lower, the fortifications less formidable than the Theodosian triple walls. Fighting rages along the waterfront, hand to hand on narrow battlements where one misstep means a fatal plunge into the harbour. But the critical moment comes at the Lycus Valley, where Giustiniani fights like a man possessed. For hours he is everywhere, rallying wavering troops, personally leading counterattacks, dragging wounded men to safety, shoring up breaches with his own hands. The defenders worship him. While Giustiniani stands, they believe they can hold. Just before dawn, a musket ball strikes him in the chest. The wound is not immediately fatal, but it is catastrophic. The ball pierces his armor beneath the arm joint, a rare gap in his protection, and lodges deep in his ribcage. He staggers, blood spreading across his breastplate, and his officers catch him before he falls. Pain and shock overwhelm him. He can barely breathe. He needs medical attention immediately, or he will die. His men carry him toward the inner gates, seeking a surgeon. And Constantine, rushing to the Lycus section during another crisis, sees Justiniani being evacuated. "Where are you going?" Constantine shouts over the battle noise. "We need you here." Justiniani, barely conscious, can only gesture at his wound. His officers explain, "Mortal injury, must withdraw, no choice." Constantine understands intellectually. The man is dying, but psychologically, strategically, emotionally, this is disaster. Justiniani's retreat will shatter morale at the exact moment when morale is everything. Constantine begs him to stay, to let surgeons treat him behind the lines, but remain visible to the troops. But Justiniani is beyond reason, drowning in his own blood, and his men carry him through the gate of Carisius toward Galata and the Genoese ships anchored in the Golden Horn. The Byzantine defenders see their greatest commander abandoning the walls. They do not know he is dying. They only know he is leaving. And something breaks inside them. Some final reserve of hope that was holding the line through exhaustion and terror and impossible odds. At precisely this moment, Ottoman scouts discover the Kirkeporta, a small postern gate in the inner wall near the Blachernai Palace, standing slightly ajar. Perhaps it was left open during a sally. Perhaps a fleeing soldier forgot to close it. Perhaps simple human error in the chaos of 12-hour battle. The reason does not matter. Ottoman soldiers pour through the opening. They are not many, perhaps 50 men in the first group, then 100 more. But they are inside the inner wall, behind the main defences, and they begin attacking defenders from the rear. Panic spreads. Soldiers on the battlements find themselves fighting enemies who should not exist, who should not be there, who cannot possibly have breached walls that have stood for 1,000 years. The mathematics of defence collapse completely. Mehmed's Janissaries, held in reserve until this moment, receive the order to advance. 8,000 elite troops in white caps and blue coats, the best trained soldiers in the world, march toward the Lycus breaches in perfect formation. They carry gunpowder weapons, composite bows, scimitars of Damascus steel. They are fresh while the defenders are exhausted. They are many while the defenders are few. They are the future, and the future is unstoppable. They reach the breaches and begin climbing over rubble and corpses. Byzantine defenders try to hold the line, but there are too many Janissaries, too many points of attack, too many enemies inside the walls. The defence fractures into individual pockets of resistance. Small groups of soldiers fighting back to back, buying seconds with their lives, dying where they stand because there is nowhere to retreat. And somewhere in that chaos, Constantine Palaiologos makes his final decision. Constantine stands on the inner wall watching his empire die, and he knows what he must do. Around him, the defence is collapsing. Janissaries swarm through the Lycus breaches. Ottoman banners appear on towers that have flown Byzantine eagles for centuries. Soldiers flee through the streets, pursued by enemies who show no mercy. The roar of battle shifts from the walls to the city itself. The sounds of doors being smashed, people screaming, the beginning of the sack that everyone knew would come if the walls fell. His commanders beg him to flee. There are ships in the Golden Horn. The Genoese might take him. He could escape to the Peloponnese, gather forces, continue resistance from Greek territories still free, live to fight another day, save the empire even if the city is lost. Constantine removes his imperial purple cloak and lets it fall to the stones. He is not an emperor anymore. Emperors rule from thrones and issue decrees and wear symbols of authority. The empire is dead. There is no throne left to sit on. There are only these walls, and the soldiers still fighting on them, and the duty to die alongside them. The empire is finished, he says quietly, but Rome will end with Romans. He draws his sword and descends into the chaos. What happens next is lost to history. Confused accounts from witnesses who survived, conflicting testimony from Ottoman soldiers, legends that grew in the retelling. Some say Constantine charged into a mass of Janissaries at the gate of St. Romanos, fighting until overwhelmed. Others claim he tore off all insignia that might identify him and died anonymously among common soldiers. Still others report he was last seen near the Lycus breaches, defending a position alongside a handful of guards who refused to abandon him. No one can agree on the exact moment or location of his death. No body was ever conclusively identified as Constantine Palaiologos. The last Roman emperor vanishes into the blood and smoke of the final battle, becoming myth even as he dies. But this much is certain. Constantine does not flee. He does not surrender. He does not beg for mercy or offer terms. He dies somewhere on those walls or in those streets, sword in hand, fighting to the last breath like the Romans of legend who fell at Thermopylae and Cannae and 1,000 other battlefields where duty mattered more than survival. His final words, according to those who claim to have heard them, "The city is fallen, and I am still alive." Then he plunges into the fighting and is seen no more. The Byzantine command structure evaporates with him. Officers die defending their positions. Others flee toward the harbour, hoping to reach ships before the Ottomans seal the port. The organised defence becomes a rout. Soldiers throw down weapons and run. Citizens barricade themselves in homes that will not protect them. Entire families huddle together in basements, praying, waiting for the inevitable. The Ottoman troops pour through breaches and gates, unstoppable now, sweeping through districts like a flood. They have been promised 3 days of plunder, and they claim it with savage efficiency. Doors are smashed, homes are ransacked, churches are stripped of gold and silver accumulated over centuries. Anyone who resists is killed. Anyone who might be valuable, young men and women, skilled craftsmen, anyone healthy enough to survive the slave markets, is bound and herded into groups for later sorting. The killing is indiscriminate at first. The blood fury of soldiers who have besieged this city for 53 days and watched friends die to its defences. But gradually, as resistance ends and the impossibility of further fighting becomes clear, the slaughter transitions to systematic looting. The soldiers have 3 days. They intend to extract every coin, every jewel, every scrap of wealth Constantinople has hoarded through 1,000 years. Near the hippodrome, Byzantine nobles make a final stand with a few dozen guards. They fight in the shadow of the ancient bronze horses that once stood in Rome itself, that witnessed chariot races and imperial ceremonies for centuries. The stand lasts perhaps 10 minutes. Then the nobles are cut down, their bodies stripped of armour and jewellery, and the Ottoman tide moves on. At the Church of the Holy Apostles, monks bar the doors and pray for the miracle that does not come. Janissaries break through and drag them out. Some are killed, others are taken for ransom. Clergy can command good prices if their congregations are willing to pay. The church's treasures, relics of saints, gilded icons, marble columns, are catalogued for removal. Nothing sacred survives the pragmatic assessment of value. And everywhere, in every district, the same scene repeats. Ottoman soldiers claiming plunder, citizens fleeing toward the last perceived sanctuary, resistance ending in blood, the systematic dismantling of a city that thought itself eternal. By mid-morning, the fighting has ended. Constantinople has fallen. The last Roman city belongs to the Ottomans, and somewhere in the carnage, unidentified among thousands of dead, lies the body of Constantine XI Palaiologos, the final emperor of an empire that lasted 1,100 years, the last man to call himself Caesar, the end of a line stretching back to Augustus. Rome has finally, truly, completely fallen. Flee to Hagia Sophia because there is nowhere else left to run. Thousands of citizens, perhaps 10,000, perhaps more, crowd into the great cathedral as Ottoman soldiers sweep through the city. The ancient prophecies promised that when enemies breached the walls, an angel would descend and drive them back at the threshold of this holiest church. The people cling to that promise now because they have nothing else. They bar the massive bronze doors, doors that weigh tons, that have stood for 900 years, that seem substantial enough to hold back armies. Families huddle beneath the vast dome. Mothers clutch children. The elderly collapse against marble columns, too exhausted to stand. Priests continue chanting liturgy as if prayer alone can change what is coming. The air is thick with incense and terror and desperate, useless hope. Outside, the sounds of the sack draw closer. Screaming, crashing, the particular silence that follows when resistance ends. And then footsteps. Hundreds of them, boots on stone, the disciplined march of janissaries who have claimed everything else and now come for the final prize. They pound on the doors. The bronze shudders but holds. Someone inside screams for the angel. Where is the angel? Where is the divine intervention promised in every prophecy? Where is God? The janissaries, bring axes. The doors are strong, but they are still just doors. Metal and wood and human craftsmanship. Nothing supernatural, nothing miraculous. The axes bite deep. Splinters fly. The bronze buckles. And then the doors collapse inward with a crash that echoes through the cathedral like the death cry of Byzantium itself. Ottoman soldiers pour through the opening. For a moment, they pause. Even battle-hardened janissaries stop at the threshold of Hagia Sophia, stunned by the sheer scale of the space. The dome soars 15 stories high. Marble columns imported from pagan temples support galleries that seem to float in golden light. Mosaics covering every surface depict Christ and the Virgin and saints in tesserae that shimmer like captured stars. This is wealth beyond calculation, beauty beyond description, the accumulated glory of 1,000 years concentrated in a single building. Then the moment passes and the looting begins. Civilians are dragged from hiding places and sorted with brutal efficiency. The young and healthy, potential slaves with market value, are bound together in chains. The elderly and infirm, worthless in the slave markets, are pushed aside or killed outright. Children are torn from mothers. Families are separated with the casual indifference of men inventorying livestock. Screaming echoes beneath the dome that has heard a millennium of prayers. Soldiers tear down tapestries and icons, ripping gold leaf from wood, prying jewels from settings, stuffing anything valuable into sacks. They smash marble screens to access the sanctuary. They ransack the altar where emperors were crowned, where patriarchs celebrated liturgy, where the divine was supposed to dwell. If God lives in Hagia Sophia, he is silent now. If angels guard this threshold, they do not descend. A group of janissaries climbs to the galleries, searching for hidden treasure and refugees. They find nobles hiding behind columns. The last remnants of Byzantine aristocracy, men whose ancestors ruled provinces and commanded armies. The nobles beg for mercy, offer ransoms, invoke treaties and the laws of honorable warfare. The janissaries strip them of their wealth and herd them outside with the rest. The looting of Hagia Sophia takes hours. Soldiers work methodically, removing everything portable: candlesticks, chalices, gospel books with gem-encrusted covers, the silver iconostasis, even the silk coverings of the altar. They discover hidden chambers containing treasures hoarded since the cathedral's construction. They find relics in golden reliquaries, fragments of the true cross, thorns from Christ's crown, bones of apostles and martyrs. Everything is taken, everything has value. Nothing is sacred anymore. By noon, Hagia Sophia stands gutted. The mosaics remain because they cannot be easily removed, but everything else is gone. The cathedral that defined Byzantine spirituality for 9 centuries is now an empty shell, its treasures scattered, its purpose ended, its congregations sold into slavery or dead in the streets outside. Across Constantinople, similar scenes unfold in every church, every palace, every wealthy home. The 3 days of plunder Mehmed promised his soldiers are being claimed with ruthless thoroughness. Estimates of the dead vary wildly, perhaps 4,000 killed in the assault and initial sack, though some accounts claim many more. The number enslaved is larger still, 30,000, 50,000, numbers impossible to verify in the chaos but staggering in their scale. The city that was Constantinople, the greatest metropolis of the medieval world, the capital of Byzantium and inheritor of Rome, is being systematically dismantled. Wealth accumulated over a millennium is being carted away. Knowledge preserved through centuries, manuscripts, documents, records, is being destroyed or dispersed. The continuity of Roman civilization, maintained unbroken since Augustus, is finally, irrevocably severed. In palaces, Ottoman officers discover libraries containing works thought lost, Greek and Roman texts preserved through the Dark Ages when Western Europe forgot how to read. Some manuscripts are saved, recognized as valuable. Others are destroyed, used as kindling or bedding, their irreplaceable contents lost forever to indifference. The great forums that once hosted 500,000 citizens stand empty except for corpses and abandoned possessions. The hippodrome, where chariots raced before crowds that could fill 100 modern stadiums, falls silent. The column of Constantine, erected when the city was founded 1100 years ago, survives the sack unchanged, stone enduring while everything else transforms. And in the streets, Byzantine survivors walk among ruins, searching for family members who were taken, mourning dead who lie unburied, processing the impossible reality that their eternal city has fallen and will never rise again. The last Romans wander through the wreckage of Rome, and there is no Rome left to save. On the afternoon of May 29th, Mehmed II enters Constantinople through the gate of Carisius, and the world changes with his first step. He rides slowly, surrounded by guards but displaying no fear, surveying the city he has claimed at such cost. 53 days of siege, perhaps 70,000 casualties among his forces. Treasure spent without counting. But now Constantinople is his, and the price seems small measured against the prize. His first destination is Hagia Sophia. He dismounts at the entrance, removes his shoes, and enters the cathedral that has defined Eastern Christianity for 9 centuries. The dome soars above him, that impossible dome, that architectural miracle, that space which has inspired awe since Justinian first saw it completed and declared, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." Mehmed walks to the center and stands beneath the dome's apex. He kneels and presses his forehead to the marble floor, offering prayers of thanksgiving to Allah. Then he rises and announces his decree. This building will become a mosque. The mosaics of Christ and the Virgin will be plastered over. Minarets will be added. The bells will be silenced, and the call to prayer will echo where Byzantine liturgy once resonated. But the building itself, this monument to human capability and divine aspiration, will be preserved. It is a decision both pragmatic and symbolic. Destroying Hagia Sophia would demonstrate power, but waste an irreplaceable asset. Converting it demonstrates something greater, that the Ottomans are not barbarians destroying civilization, but inheritors claiming their rightful place as civilization's new guardians. Mehmed spends 3 days touring his conquered city, cataloguing its resources, planning its restoration. What he sees shocks him despite the warnings. Constantinople is not the glorious metropolis of reputation, but a half-empty ruin, its population decimated, entire districts abandoned and crumbling. The Byzantines did not lose a thriving empire, they lost the ghost of one, clinging to memories of greatness long since faded. But the location remains perfect. The strategic position astride Europe and Asia, controlling the straits between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, commanding trade routes that connect 3 continents. This is still the most valuable real estate in the medieval world. Mehmed immediately declares Constantinople the new Ottoman capital, renaming it Istanbul, and begins planning its reconstruction. He issues orders to repopulate the city. Greeks who fled during the siege, are invited to return with promises of protection. Turks from across Anatolia are encouraged to settle. Armenians, Jews, and other minorities are welcomed. The slave markets are closed after 3 days. Those already taken are lost, but further enslavement is forbidden. Mehmed wants a living city, not a depopulated shell. Churches are catalogued and their status determined. Some are converted to mosques. Others remain Christian, serving the substantial Greek population that will continue living under Ottoman rule. A new patriarch is appointed to oversee the Orthodox community. The church survives, transformed from state religion to protected minority. The political consequences ripple outward from Constantinople, like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The Byzantine Empire, which has existed in some form for over 1100 years, ceases to exist. The title of Roman Emperor, claimed by rulers from Augustus to Constantine XI, dies with the last man to wear it. The ancient world, finally, completely ends. Western Europe reacts with shock and recrimination. How could Constantinople fall? How could Christendom allow its eastern bulwark to collapse? The finger-pointing begins immediately. Venice blames Genoa. Genoa blames Venice. Everyone blames everyone for failing to send adequate help. The Pope calls for a crusade that will never materialize. Kings and princes offer condolences and quietly calculate how the new reality affects their interests. Trade routes shift immediately. The Italian city-states, which profited from Byzantine commerce for centuries, must now negotiate with Ottoman authorities. Venice and Genoa establish new treaties, accepting diminished influence in exchange for continued access to eastern markets. The overland Silk Road becomes more costly and dangerous, pushing European merchants to seek alternative routes to Asia. Within decades, this search will drive Portuguese and Spanish exploration westward, ultimately leading to the discovery of the Americas. Scholars flee Constantinople carrying whatever manuscripts they saved from the sack. They scatter across Italy, bringing Greek texts that Western Europe has not seen for centuries: Plato, Aristotle, the Greek tragedians, mathematical and scientific works preserved by Byzantine scribes through the Dark Ages. This influx of classical knowledge accelerates the Italian Renaissance, fueling the cultural and intellectual revolution that will remake European civilization. The Ottoman Empire, now controlling both Anatolia and the Balkans, becomes the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Mehmed's successors will expand further, conquering Egypt and Arabia, reaching the gates of Vienna, ruling territories from Algeria to the Persian Gulf. For the next 4 centuries, the Ottomans will be the primary power against which Europe defines itself, the rival, the threat, the other. But in the immediate aftermath, in the days and weeks following May 29, 1453, the most significant consequence is psychological. Constantinople was eternal. Everyone believed it. The walls had never fallen. The city had stood for over 1,000 years. It was supposed to stand forever, and then it fell. If Constantinople can fall, anything can fall. If walls that defied the world for a millennium can be broken by modern artillery, then no fortification is safe. If prophecies promising divine protection can fail, then faith alone cannot preserve nations. The fall of Constantinople announces to the medieval world that the old certainties are dead, that the future belongs not to those who trust in ancient strength, but to those who embrace new technologies and new ways of warfare. Gunpowder has proven its superiority over stone. Centralized empires have demonstrated their advantage over feudal fragmentation. The future has defeated the past, and everyone who witnessed it knows that the world has changed in ways that cannot be reversed. Mehmed stands on the walls of Constantinople, his walls now, and looks out over the city and the straits beyond. He is 21 years old. He has accomplished what 7 Ottoman sultans before him failed to achieve. He has ended an empire that traced its lineage to Julius Caesar. He has claimed the prize that Alexander the Great never won. History will call him Mehmed the Conqueror, and the name will be justified. But standing here in the ruins of Byzantium, surveying the cost in blood and treasure, and irreplaceable cultural loss, even Mehmed must understand what his victory represents. He has not simply conquered a city. He has closed a chapter of human history that lasted over 2,000 years. The age of Rome, of legions and forums and emperors crowned with laurels, has finally ended. A new age begins, shaped by gunpowder and centralized states and religions competing for the soul of civilization. The last Roman city has fallen. The medieval world is dying, and from its ashes, the modern world is being born in fire and blood and the ruins of Constantinople.